On April 21st, 1974, United States Air Force airmen Dale Pierre, William Andrews, and Keith Roberts were sitting in their barracks at the Air Force Base in Ogden, Utah. They were going over tomorrow's plans one more time. They have been planning to rob the HiFi electronics store for several weeks now. Andrews and Pierre agreed that they wouldn't leave any witnesses behind because that's how people get caught. Roberts, the getaway driver, rehearsed the plan one more time with the group. Then all the airmen went to bed, continuing to rehearse each step in their head. Tomorrow was the big day and was going to be the thrill of a lifetime. This is the true crime story of the HiFi shop murders. Sherry Ansley just started her new job at the HiFi electronics store as a cashier a week prior to the robbery. The HiFi shop in Ogden, Utah sold a lot of music records, electronics, record players, basically anything relating to music or any electronics they sold. Sherry Ansley was still attending high school and she was actually excited to get this job because it allowed her to earn a little extra money. She was just 18 years old and engaged to be married. In 1974 in Utah, it really wasn't that unusual to have an 18-year-old being engaged. Ansley was a super bright, positive person. All her friends said she was always happy and made everyone around her smile. On April 22nd, 1974, Sherry Ansley was closing up the HiFi shop with Stanley Walker. Stanley Walker was a recent high school graduate. He was a 20-year-old making a name for himself in the community. He was a great basketball player in high school, which actually led him to be one of the coaches on the high school basketball team. He also helped coordinate large events at a local charity, all while attending a local college. During the nights, he would work at the HiFi shop as a salesperson, making a little extra cash on the side. While Sherry and Stanley were continuing to do their nightly closing routine, Courtney Nisbet walked in and asked if he could actually park his car in the parking lot because he had some errands to run at some nearby stores. Courtney was sent on a mission by his parents, Orrin and Carol Nisbet, to get a few groceries for the night. Courtney Nisbet was a 16-year-old high school student working to get his pilot license. He excelled in all of his studies in high school. Both Stanley and Sherry told Courtney that it wasn't a problem to park in the parking lot. So Courtney parked his car there and went on to go run his errands. As Courtney was walking out of the HiFi store, two vans circled the block and pulled into the parking lot towards the back of the store. The two vans pulled up to the back door of the building. This back door is typically only used to bring in new stock for the store. As the vans pulled up, two people, including Pierre and Andrews, got out of the vans. Pierre and Andrews ran through the back door of the store brandishing guns. Roberts and another person remained in the van as their getaway drivers. Pierre and Andrews grabbed Sherry and Stanley as they were trying to close up the store. The other two people that broke into the store with them started to load up all of the electronics and bringing them out to the vans. While the electronics were being loaded into the vans, Pierre and Andrews took Sherry and Stanley into the basement and tied them up. Everything that the group of robbers rehearsed for was going exactly to plan. That is, until Courtney came back from running his errands. He came back into the store to thank Sherry and Stanley one last time for letting him park in the parking lot. Pierre and Andrews quickly grabbed Courtney and brought him into the basement as well. They tied Courtney up next to Sherry and Stanley. As Sherry, Stanley, and Courtney are tied up in the basement, the group of assailants continue to load all of the electronics into the vans. Quite a bit of time had passed because Stanley Walker's father, Orrin Walker, noticed that his son hadn't returned from work around the time that he normally did. So Orrin Walker began to get worried and he actually went to the store to look for his son. As soon as Orrin walked into the store, he was met by Pierre and Andrews holding a gun to his head. Pierre and Andrews led Orrin down into the basement and tied him up next to his son. Meanwhile, Courtney Nisbet's mother is thinking the exact same thing about her son. Courtney has actually been gone for quite a while. So Carol Nisbet actually got in her vehicle, drove over to the area that she knew her son was going to be in, noticed that his car was parked in the HiFi parking lot, and went into the store. Carol was greeted the exact same way as Orrin. She got a gun to her head and was led into the basement and tied up. As Carol was led down into the basement, Courtney realized that it was his mother and let out a terrified scream. He did not want his mother to be in danger, obviously. There are now 5 total hostages in the store tied up in the basement. Sherry begins to cry and beg to just let them go. Her cries for mercy were ignored by Andrews and Pierre. At this point, the 5 hostages knew that they were in a dangerous situation, but Andrews and Pierre made it seem like they were just going to take the electronics and leave. What they didn't know was Andrews and Pierre actually made a pact that they weren't going to leave any witnesses alive. For weeks, they had also been planning clever ways ways to kill all the witnesses. One way that they had planned to kill everybody actually came from a movie that they had been binge watching. They became fascinated with the movie Magnum Force. In one of the scenes in Magnum Force, a prostitute is forced to drink drain cleaner. As they're forcing the drain cleaner down her throat, she dies instantly. Andrews and Pierre have been watching this movie non-stop, especially that scene. They now got the clever idea that this was how they were going to kill all of their witnesses. As all 5 hostages were tied up in the basement, the vans were actually getting very full with electronics, so it was about time that Andrews and Pierre made their getaway. Pierre asked Andrews to go get something from the van. Andrews ran upstairs and came back with a brown paper bag that had a bottle in it. Pierre poured out the contents of the bottle into a cup. It was a bluish green liquid. He then told everybody that it was vodka laced with sleeping pills. Pierre then told Andrews to get all the hostages up to make it easier for him to pour it down their throats. Pierre and Andrews then forced all of the hostages to drink the drain cleaner. As soon as the drain cleaner touched their lips, it began to burn and blisters began to form. Everybody was in excruciating pain. To stop all the victims from spitting out the drain cleaner, Pierre and Andrews decided that they wanted to tape their mouths shut with duct tape. However, with all of the blisters and all of the liquid being spit out from their mouths, the duct tape wouldn't actually stick. Pierre also decided not to force Sherry Ansley to drink the drain cleaner. The last person that they had to force to drink the drain cleaner was Orrin Walker. As Pierre and Andrews poured the drain cleaner into Orrin's mouth, Orrin let it all slide out the side of his mouth. He actually saw what it did to everybody else, so he let it pour out of his mouth. He then fell to the ground and began convulsing in a ploy to play dead. At this point, all the victims were screaming in pain, but they weren't actually dying like it was portrayed in the movie. Pierre decided that killing everyone was taking too long and it was too loud. So he pulled out his gun and shot Carol and Courtney Nisbet in the head. Pierre then turned his gun over to Orrin Walker, took a shot but actually missed him. He then proceeded to shoot Stanley Walker, killing him. Knowing that he missed Orrin Walker the first time, Pierre then turned around, took a few steps closer to Orrin to make sure that he wouldn't miss this time. He pulled the trigger, shooting Orrin in the head. The only person left without a gunshot wound was now 18-year-old Sherry Ansley. Pierre grabbed Sherry by the arm, forced her over to the corner of the basement. Then, holding a gun to her head, he forced her to take off all of her clothes. He repeatedly raped her while Andrews watched. After he was done, he dragged her back to the center of the basement and shot her in the head. It's now believed that Pierre didn't give Sherry Ansley the Drano because he was planning on raping her the whole time. It goes to show you how sick and twisted this person really is. With everyone dead, Pierre and Andrews were going to head back upstairs, hop in their vans, and take off. They got to the edge of the steps when they noticed Orrin Walker was still breathing. Pierre went over to him, straddled him, wrapped a cord around his neck, and began to choke him. This technique still didn't kill Orrin. Pierre actually got very frustrated with this, so he grabbed a ballpoint pen, stuck it in Orrin's ear. He then kicked the pen into Orrin's ear several times. The pen punctured Orrin's eardrum, broke in half, then punctured through the side of his neck. Now, thinking everyone is dead, Pierre and Andrews run upstairs, get into the van, and take off. All 5 victims were discovered 4 hours later when Orrin's wife and their younger son came looking for them. They came into the store, and Orrin's son actually heard a few things in the basement. He kicked down the door, went into the basement, and was the first person to see the horrific scene. Orrin's wife immediately called 911. When paramedics and investigators got there, they witnessed one of the most graphic scenes they had ever seen. There is blood everywhere. There are multiple people dead. It is a scene right from a horror movie. Stanley Walker and Sherry Ansley were dead. Carol Nisbet was still alive, but ended up dying on the way to the hospital in an ambulance. Courtney Nisbet wasn't expected to survive the trip to the hospital, but miraculously did. Although he survived this horrifying encounter, he had severe brain damage and wasn't released from the hospital for 9 months. He was able to return to school about a year after the incident. He graduated with his class in 1976 and went on to go to college. He ended up dropping out of college because he had severe amnesia and it was very difficult for him to remember any of his studies. He then went on to collect government assistance for disability because he couldn't hold a steady job due to the amnesia. He later got married to Catherine Hunter. Courtney suffered the rest of his life. He was always in severe pain and ended up dying on June 4th of 2002 at the age of 44. Orrin Walker was the only other survivor. He had severe chemical burns to his face, throat, and mouth. Orrin also had severe damage to his ear from the ballpoint pen. As the investigation began, news organizations got wind of what had happened. Within hours, they were broadcasting it on the news. A few hours after the news broadcast broadcast, they actually received their first tip. An anonymous Air Force airman called the Ogden Police Department and told them that he and Andrews actually had a conversation a couple weeks ago. Andrews stated to him at that point that he was going to rob the HiFi store and he was going to kill anyone that got in his way. A couple hours after that first tip, police actually received another phone call. This one was from a few teenage boys that were dumpster diving near the Ogden Air Force Base. While they were in the dumpsters, they actually found some wallets and a few purses. Looking through the purses, they found IDs, and they said that they belonged to the people that were just murdered at the HiFi shop. They said that they saw this on the news and they were pretty sure that all of this stuff belonged to them. I don't know about you, but this community seems like it's a pretty great community to live in. Within hours of the news breaking of this incident, they received several great tips from the community. Investigators responded to the second tip immediately. They drove out to where that dumpster was to take a closer look. As investigators arrived and they started retrieving the items from the dumpster, they actually noticed that they were starting to gather a crowd of airmen around the dumpster area. So investigators decided that they were going to put on a little show for the airmen. They knew from the first tip that they received that Andrews was actually in the Air Force. As investigators are digging through the dumpster, they start holding up each piece of evidence that they find. Investigators noticed that when they held up the evidence, everyone was talking very quietly to themselves. Everyone except for two people. These two people were talking louder than everyone else and were continuously using frantic hand gestures. These two people then started to walk away from the dumpster before anyone else did. Investigators noticed that they were also having a conversation that looked very urgent. Investigators took note of the two people that left and later found out that it was Andrews and Pierre. So they got search warrants to search the barracks that Andrews and Pierre were housed in. Once the search warrants were signed, investigators tore through that barracks. They found flyers for the HiFi store as well as a signed agreement for a storage locker. Investigators then got a search warrant for the storage locker. In that storage locker, they found a ton of electronic equipment that matched the serial numbers from the HiFi store. They also found a half-empty bottle of Drano. Based on the evidence that was found at the storage locker and the barracks, police had enough to arrest Pierre and Andrews. During the interrogation, they actually found out that Keith Roberts was the getaway driver. Keith Roberts was then arrested and charged with the same crimes. It was speculated that there were another 2 or 3 people that went through with this crime as well, but they couldn't identify them. Kudos to these detectives. They actually received awards for the way they handled this investigation, and the techniques that they used were actually put into the FBI database and are now taught at Quantico to new FBI agents. Andrews, Pierre, and Roberts were all tried for first-degree murder. Pierre and Roberts were both convicted of murder and sentenced to death. Roberts was only convicted of robbery and was sent to prison. Orrin Walker actually testified during the trial. He called Pierre a sadist and a sick person. He said that after Pierre shot the first couple victims, he was actually prancing around the basement like he enjoyed it. The NAACP then got involved with the convictions of Andrews and Pierre. All of the appeals were upheld, and Andrews and Pierre were still sitting on death row. Dale Shelby Pierre was executed in 1977. They essentially wasted no time with this asshole. It was also found out that Pierre was a main suspect in the murder of Edward Jefferson. Edward Jefferson was actually a sergeant in the Air Force at the same time Pierre was there. They were on the same base, and Edward Jefferson ended up being murdered one day, and Pierre was definitely the main suspect. They just didn't have enough evidence to pin it on him. William Andrews was executed by lethal injection on July 30th, 1992. He was on death row for 18 years and attempted to get his conviction reversed several times. The getaway driver, Keith Roberts, was convicted of 2 counts of robbery and was sentenced to 5 years to life in prison. He was paroled on May 12th, 1987 after 13 years in prison. He died of suicide on August 8th of 1992. This was about a week after Andrews' execution. It came out in the trial that Roberts didn't know the plan to kill everybody. He was just the getaway driver and basically made friends with the wrong group of people. That is my true crime story of the HiFi store murders. Please give me a comment if you like this content. I am a new YouTuber here, so any little bit of information or feedback helps. Until next time, bye everybody.